Welcome to ChessAdvancedd. This game was played in Title Tuesday, and this is the finals of the autumn split. With the white pieces, we have R2. He is basically Pranesh, and with the black pieces, we have Magnus Carlsen, which is Magnus Carlsen. So hey, this is going to be an epic matchup. Pranesh is in absolute top form. He also won the last week's Freestyle Friday, so he's in absolute top shape. So let's see what he does with against Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces. He goes for knight to f3. He starts with the ready, and we have d5. Now just going for b3, g6, and bishop to b2. This is the Magnus Carlsen attack. And now just comes this knight to f6, developing pieces, g3 in this position, and here we have bishop to g7, c4, finally just challenging the center. And sometimes these positions from the Magnus Carlsen attack transposes to English or even Agincourt defense, where we saw a game of Andrei Sipenko facing off against Nordibek Yakuboev, where Andrei was able to win the game, transposing like that. He just decaps on c4 spade. Now just comes b captures b6 now, and here we have bishop to g2. You have to go for bishop to b7, castles in this position, and c5. Just going for that center, d3, and just castles now. And now just going for this knight to c3. We have knight to c6 developing by Magnus, and in this position you could go for this knight to e5 line. You could also go for this very passive move with e3, but after e6 now you just go for queen to e2, and after queen to c7 you just jump in with the knight. Thank you very much for the tempo. And once the queen is under attack, queen moves. Now you go for this rook f to d1, controlling the entire file. And here after rook a to d8, knight to e5 in this position, asking for a trade. Knight captures, bishop captures, and king captures. Most likely they won't go for this, because you have to understand, although your knight is very strong, you have most likely traded everything that was of importance, and now this game is going to end in a draw. We have knight to c6, just knight to e5 was played, so he is asking for some trades. So is this a thing that he's fine with the draw against Magnus, or is it that he has something prepared? A queen to c8 was played, but now just comes knight caps on c6, bishop captures, and just a4. And he's saying that, you want to trade, you just trade. You just trade on my terms, improve the position of my king, and Magnus does that. Magnus goes for bishop caps on g2. He just king caps on g2 by Pranesh, and now just comes h5, and he just h3. a6 now, and here we have queen to b3, just developing the queen, rook a to d8, and now even comes f3. So he doesn't like the fact that that diagonal is going to remain open, and anytime you can just give some checks. You don't want that to happen. So here rook to b8 was played, knight to e4, getting the knight centralized. And although there is some tension between the knights and the bishops, everything is fine. Here Magnus just ignores everything and goes for queen to e6, just develops the position of his queen. Queen to c2 now, and in this position maybe you can try to just break open the center towards the queen side with a move like b5, but that would involve a lot of trades. Hey, just a captures, and after a captures, c captures, finally rook captures, and now you just go for this bishop caps on f6, e captures, and now you can go for this rook to a7. The rook has infiltrated finally. You could have some moves later in the future once the queen moves, and what you want to do is maybe just double up towards the a file, take complete charge over the a file, but you need to be careful because moves like that are always in the air. So everything is fine here. Pranesh's position would have been fine as well if he decided to go for this, but after queen to c2 he went for this knight back to e8, asking for a trade, but hey, just a5, challenging those pawns towards the queen side. Bishop captures, queen captures was played, and although you could trade here and open up an attack towards the king, towards the queen, but the trouble for you is that it just doesn't do anything. It just ruins your pawn structure, and you don't want that to happen. So Magnus just go for knight to d6, asking for a trade, but hey, just a captures. We have knight caps on e4 first, f captures, and here rook caps on b6 comes an attack towards the queen. And this entire game is going to be about now, is Magnus his outside passer an asset or a liability? Because if that passive falls, Magnus is going to be down a pawn, and the endgame here, Pranesh could actually, if he pulls off a miracle in a queen's endgame or in a rook's endgame, whichever it's going to be, he can try to press against Magnus, and that's, well, most people don't even get that opportunity. Here queen to c1 was played, and now just comes rook b to d8, queen to e3 now, but here rook to b2, and it's starting to look a little bit scary. So here just rook to a5 was played, trying to go after the pawn, saying that you want to go after my pawns, you don't have any threats, but I do. Here rook to c8 was played, defending against that, but rook f to a1, completely piling up towards the a6 pawn, and now it's starting to become a little bit of a liability here. Rook to c6 by Magnus, saving everything. Queen to f2 was played, and now just comes king to g7. You can go for this rook to f1, just complete pressure towards the f file, complete domination, and the queen cannot move. If you play a move like f6, you weaken the position, and the rook can somehow jump in later in the future. Queen to e3, you can go for queen to e5, just saving that pawn. But after this g4, now you just go for h4, because you don't want to allow trades. If you open up the lines, the rook can join in, and it could get very dangerous. So here after rook f to a1, just rook b to b6, and saving everything. Now the queen is finally just free to move. Queen to f2, g5, and everything is locked down. Anyone who's going to try and push is going to be Magnus. But here after king to g7, rook 1 to a2 was paid, asking for a trade, and Magnus obliges. Rook captures, queen to e5 in this position, finally just saving everything. But here just rook to a5, just completely piling on, not even allow Magnus's pawns to get pushed. Queen to b2, and here just comes queen to e3. Queen to b4 was paid, rook to a1, and now just comes queen to c3. And bear with me for a few minutes, because the thing is that this game is a long game. So I'm not trying to get you very bored, but I will show you all the lines. Here rook to f1, and now just comes a5. So he allows us that Magnus' pawn can be pushed, but what does he have in compensation? He has the center e5, and now just comes rook to e6. And don't ever make the mistake. You cannot go for this queen caps on c5. If you decide to go for this, your entire world will fall apart, because here after rook captures, queen to f2, and you think that maybe everything is fine, but now just comes f6. Everything is defended. You don't have to worry about your king anymore. And once queen to e1 asking for a trade, queen to b2, and now that's going to be a threat. You're going to have to defend it with a move like rook to f2. But here just comes queen to c2. That pass one is going to be pushed. Everything is defended. Your position is really, really bad, and there are a lot of tactics in the position as well. You need to be really, really careful not to blunder anything, because I mean, even something as simple as, just pushing the pawn can win the game. So you need to be really careful. But after rook to e6, queen to f3 was played, not going for capturing that, and a good decision by Pranesh. Both players are roughly now less than 2 minutes on the clock, but you need to be careful. Even Magnus less than 1 minute on the 1 minute on the clock is absolutely dangerous. F6 was played, and now just comes e captures. Rook captures, attacking the queen. Queen to b7 in this position, threatening to go for that check if you go for this rook captures, but now just comes to rook captures nonetheless. Hey, just king captures was paid. The problem with going for this queen captures is basically hey, just rook to f7 would be played, and you can just lose the rook and say goodbye to the rook, and you don't have any compensation. By the way, if you were thinking that maybe you'd have some perpetual, it's not going to happen. So that was a very easy tactic. Many players can miss, but here just king caps on f1, queen to e5, and queen to a7. Now just comes a4, pushing the pawn, and you could capture this, but you don't want to allow and lose all both of these pawns. So here king to f2 was paid, but now a barrage of checks by Magnus. Queen to d4 check, king to f3, queen to f6 check, king to e3, queen to e6 check, king to f2, and even queen to f5 check. And normally anyone would hope that Magnus would go for a draw in this position, because, well, for the least you have 5 pawns against, well, 5 pawns, but you have very weak pawns. I mean, you have 3 pawn islands, and Pranesh has 2 pawn islands. I don't think Magnus should have gone for anything other than a draw in this position, and he had a draw in his sleep. A king to g2, queen to e5, king to f2, queen to d4 check, king to f3, queen to f6 check, king to e3, h4 was played. And the thing is that once I was watching it live, it was just the thing that you don't want to overpush. Magnus was like, maybe if it was, I think, Hikaru, or if it was any other top player, I think he would have been happy with the draw and taken a draw right here. But just because it was Pranesh, he thought that maybe he can try to force a win in this position. Well, the positions can be won not because you're playing against a specific player, but because the positions are winning, and that's what Magnus needs to keep in mind. Because here just comes g caps on h4, queen captures, king to d2, but just queen to g5 check, king to d1, queen to g1 check, king to d2, and queen to g5 check, and now just comes king to d1, but here queen to e3 was played. And if you capture this pawn now, you're going to lose the h3 pawn, and after queen to a1 check, it's most likely going to be a draw. Queen to e5, queen to h5, asking for a trade. Even if you trade, it's going to be fine, but after queen to f4, queen to f5, queen to g3 in this position, and there is not much life in the position. But after queen to e3, h4 was played, and now just comes king to h6, queen caps on a4, finally grabbing that, and now you don't have that to coming with a tempo, but you do have some checks, and Magnus should have gone for that with the queen to g1 check, and most likely he would have still gotten a perpetual like position. But here just king to h5 played by Magnus. Now just comes queen to e8, queen to e6, and here queen to h8 check, king to g4, queen to h6 now, queen to f6, and here king to c2. A lot of moves in this position, but still Magnus needs to be really careful, because he is the one down a pawn, and if it comes to it, the end game, if queens get traded off, would be completely lost for him. Queen to f5, now just comes king to d1, and here e5. Finally Magnus pushes the pawn, but this is an absolute blunder in this position, and here Pranesh can actually win the game. There are only 2 moves in this position which can win the game right on the spot for him, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video, try and find out these at least one move which gives you a decisive advantage against the world's best. Have at it. So congratulations to everyone who's able to find this idea. The move is king to d2. Yes, as simple as that, because you don't have anything. If you try to go for a move like e4 in this position, because you have to understand, you don't have anything along this diagonal, you don't have any checks, then just comes this d captures. And if this, well, if you dare to even capture this, then the trouble for you is queen to g5 check, and you don't have any squares. King to h3, then just comes h5. And now whatever you do, if you go for this g caps on h5, then just comes queen caps on h5, king to g3, queen to g5 check, king to h3, and finally just queen caps on c5. I'm up 2 pawns, and even if it's queen's endgame, this position still will be completely winning. But here after e5, king to c2 was played because both players are playing on seconds on the clock, and it's very difficult to try and find the right idea. E4 was still played by Magnus, king to c3 in this position, and now just comes queen to e5 check, king to b3, queen to f5, king to c3, and finally going for queen to f6 check, but here king to b3. And probably this was the time where, Magnus should have just gone and pulled the brakes, but he still kept on pushing. Hey, queen to b6 check, maybe just, trying to go for a draw. King to c2, e caps on d3, captures, queen to f6 again, and after queen to g5 check, queen captures, h captures, and this position will be a draw. King captures, d4, c captures, and now just going for this. You can push the pawn, but most likely whatever you do in this position, this is going to be a draw. But in this position, after king to b3, Magnus went for queen to f5, and queen to f5 is a move that Pranesh would have definitely seen. And now, because that was the situation, if you see this position, this was the position a few moves ago as well, with the inclusion of e4, and he would have calculated the e4, what happens if e4. But now with this, when your king is safe, you don't need to worry about any complications in the position. And after this, here d caps on e4 was played, which is the best move in this position, and Pranesh is completely winning against Magnus, and it's Magnus's fault. It's completely Magnus's fault. He had the chance to draw. He was the one down a pawn, but he overpushed, thinking that maybe he can beat Pranesh. Because if it was, I told you, Hikaru, Hans, or it was Firouzja, he would have taken the draw. But now he just queen caps on e4 was played, but now just comes queen to g5 check, king to s3, and even h5. But h5 is a little bit, going overboard in this position. All you had to do in this position was just go for this queen caps on c5, and then game would be completely winning. Yes, you can get a pawn, but it's still very unlikely that Magnus would have survived here. But h5 is not a good move now. It was a good move a few moves ago. Here, king g caps on h5, queen to h5 check, and you're not supposed to go for g caps on h5. What you're supposed to go was queen to b1 check, and the checks are unstoppable. Most likely this would have resulted in, well, lost position. But here g caps on h5 was played by Magnus, and just completely loses the game, because here after queen caps on h5 check, king to g3, it's the same idea. Queen to g5, king to s3, and queen caps on c5. I have 2 pawns. I don't even need 2 pawns. I just need 1 pawn, and here Magnus just grabs it, but queen to d4, and now just comes king to g3, c5, and pawn is pushing. But still, there's going to be a barrage of checks. Queen to b5 check, king to c3, queen to a5 check, king to c4, queen to a2 check, king to b5, queen to b3 check, and here after king to b4, queen to e6 was played, but now just comes c6. I'm pushing the pawn. Again, a lot of checks you're going to have to deal with. Queen to b8 check, king to a6, queen to a8 check, king to b6, and queen to b8 check. But now I just put the king on a5, queen to a8 check, king to b5, and queen to b8 check, king to c4, queen to f4 check, queen to d4, and queen to c1 check was played. But the trouble for you is now I can block it with the queen, and that will hit the king, and you'll be forced to trade. And that's exactly what Pranesh does. And in this position, Magnus resigned the game, and here Pranesh beat Magnus Carlsen less than 90 moves in Title Tuesday. And I don't want to spoil the result for you, because I will be showing a few more games from the ending of the autumn split, and this was an absolutely amazing result. This was the only game Magnus lost in the entire Title Tuesday that happened yesterday, and it was absolutely spectacular that Pranesh was able to beat Magnus. So yeah, a really grinding game, but absolutely a worth it one. But really, Pranesh played spectacular chess. Aside from a few missed chances, I don't think he played any bad moves, and definitely a great result for the young Pranesh, young genius prodigy coming from India. So yeah, thank you all for watching. I'll be coming back with some of these amazing games, so stay tuned to the channel, stay updated, and I'll be seeing you guys very soon. Thank you very much for watching.